I think the big question for India is, why does India underperform so much in manufacturing? It's been sort of puzzle for a long time. And especially low skill, labor intensive manufacturing. You normally think that, a developing country with lots of labor, lots of uneducated labor also should do low skill, labor intensive production. And, you go, why isn't India doing this? China did this when they were starting. Every developing country, most developing countries did this when they were starting. But India never did this. So there are lots of reasons why, given in the literature on this. India's judicial system is very backlogged, so you can't believe in contracts. You have no faith in contracts. Because of that, size has to be small, and if size is small, then you can't really manage to compete in the world on labor-intensive things. China has a sweater city and sock city and so on. So they have huge scale. So India can't compete. Another reason which is often given is because of the same judicial issues, you won't trust anyone but a blood relation to run your company. So you end up having managers who are not very good, they're not very professional, and you don't want to become big because then you'll have to rely on outside managers. And they'll just run away with your money. So there are a lot of reasons given, but the reason that we think is really predominant, which nobody has ever really studied, is that there are barriers to exit. And this is a feature of India's institutional setup, these barriers to exit. And I'll tell you more about that. And these exit barriers, exit barriers act like entry barriers. Because if you know you can't leave, why are you going to come in? It's just like, if you had to marry the first person you dated, you would never date, right? So what happens with exit barriers is not only is entry reduced because of this expectation of being very hard to leave if things go wrong, but bad firms, unproductive firms, will stick around hoping for a good shock, and then everything will be okay. Because getting out is so expensive. And I'll tell you about why this is the case. So they're stuck. So low productive firms are there using capital, which could be better allocated to new firms that might be high productivity. So you're wasting capital. As a result of all of this, you have very low productivity of firms on average, lower output than they should be, and lower employment because these firms are small. They don't want to grow large. So what we're going to do today is I'm going to provide you with some evidence on exit barriers using firm level data. And how can I provide you with this evidence? You'll see. We'll see if there were exit barriers, what would we expect to see? And I'll show you that what we expect to see is exactly what we see in the data. Then we're going to quantify these exit costs by building and estimating a rich structural model, which has the features that when we talk about this, you'll see are there in and then we're going to do counterfactuals with our estimated model. And we're going to talk about the difference between reducing direct exit costs, which we call scrap value. When you get out, how much will you get for your stuff? Versus reducing firing costs, which are a large part of the exit barriers. Because, as I'll tell you more about it, in these institutional factors in India, the laws make getting rid of workers very hard, especially if you're a large firm. Right? I think some of the most fun we had in this paper was finding historical examples, which are so ridiculous that they make you laugh. So we're going to try and understand the policy trade-offs, reducing exit costs versus reducing firing costs, and what are the trade-offs here between employment and value added? Because these are the two key things that the government cares for. It wants higher GDP, And it doesn't want to fire workers because the political consequences of this in a democracy like India, it's suicide. So I'm going to tell you a little bit more about India, about these institutional factors. Then I'm going to give you some spatial temporal variation. And then I'm going to show you the weird stuff that happens in India about dormancy. Um, and I'll show that all the facts line up with our story of exit barriers. So, what are these institutional factors that create exit barriers? So, there are at least two. One is two major ones. One is that India has a weird legal system. If you're a formal firm, and most of the output in manufacturing in India comes from these formal firms. Most of the firms are informal, but their output is only about 15% of manufacturing output. So formal firms, the Industrial Development Act, IDA, which says if you're in mining, manufacturing, or plantations, if your plant is more than 100 workers, 100 regular workers, meaning permanent workers. And regular workers means people doing core jobs. Like if you're on the assembly line, you're a regular worker. But if you're a sweeper, you can be a contractor because that's not a core function. So you can basically never fire them. You have to ask government for permission to fire these workers, and government never gives you permission. So firms want to stay below 100. You want to stay out of the sight of the government. But this is complicated by the fact that India is a common law system. Common law means, unlike Napoleonic law, where there's a code for everything, common law means it goes to the courts, and then the courts interpret the law, and so the law changes over time through the court's interpretation. And common law is good because it's flexible, but it's bad because when you go to the courts are also political animals. So you don't know what's going to happen with certainty. So that puts a lot of pressure on people not to go to the courts. So these institutions, this is one big thing, the IDA. Software grew in India, tech. Why? It's not manufacturing. So it didn't come under the IDA. And the tech companies go to huge lengths to make sure a case never goes to the court. To say, are tech workers manufacturing workers or are they not? They make them sign contracts, the workers sign contracts. And contracts have golden handshakes as long as you don't do anything like go to the courts. So it's very interesting how software developed in India. If the government had known it was going to develop, it would have never developed.
Sorry, so the labor institutions is kind of segmented, you mean, by manufacturing and
yeah, I mean, the IPA says if it's a manufacturing firm, over 100 workers, you're 100% subject to it. But you'll see from my examples that all of this, because of common law, the interpretation is fuzzy.
Yeah, I know. We have in Japan, we have very similar situation.
Really?
Yeah, it's very similar.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so I know what you are talking about.
That may be a good application to Japan.
Yeah. Yeah, we should explain why Japanese
activities are. That's fascinating.
So your master's thesis.
Master's thesis. I estimated structure.
Related, so when it comes to the hiring costs, the impression is that the caricature is that comparing US and let's say Europe it's much harder.
It's much harder in Europe.
Are you kind of saying that first India is much even more extreme, and also that actually applies only to some specific sectors?
Only, yeah, but it doesn't. You'll see, because we do a lot of sort of background on the legal side, and you'll see how this IDA casts a shadow over the entire economy. It's most strong in manufacturing for firms over 100 because there's no doubt that it works there. But you don't know what the courts are going to say, so you try. You try everything. So,
Can I
yeah,
ask you?
of course.
I remember there was a streamlined bankruptcy legal reform and 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And I
And
was wondering how that impacted.
Very good.
your book.
The second big problem here is that India has no bankruptcy law yet. There's no path to bankruptcy. So, for example, in the US, if you want to go bankrupt, there are 2 or 3 ways you can do it. Chapter 11 bankruptcy reopen. In India, there's no path. What you do is you say, I want to go bankrupt, all right? And you say, well, I can't fire my workers. What do I do? Well, I have to pay them anyway because I can't fire them, all right? And what do? You just don't raise their wages, turn the air conditioning off, hope they leave, try to get them to pay them to get out. And so sooner or later, you will have no workers. But because there's no no bankruptcy law, you're still stuck. Because by this time, what you've done, a little bit of a caricature here, is these workers have been sitting around not doing anything, but you have to pay them. You're broke. You've been borrowing from the banks because in India, again, the bank officer doesn't want to look bad. So when you go to him, he knows you're broke. But what is he going to say? He's going to say, if I give them a loan, maybe they'll be okay. And so then you get the loan. So by the time you're ready to exit, what do you have? Your mountain of debt. And unlike the bankruptcy law, where it's very clear who gets what of your machinery and your land and everything, it's not clear in India. So what happens? Everything goes to the court, which takes 10 years if people are really disputing issues. And that's a major cost. You can't get out. So these two features interact with each other. And you'll see from our model and all the data, we think it's really important. It's so important that in the ASI, you may have noticed anybody who works with Indian data is they're active firms. They're producing, they've got workers. They're dormant firms with workers, and they're dormant firms without workers. These are the dormant firms with workers, the ones waiting to get rid of the workers. The dormant firms without workers are the ones who try to get out, somehow, close this place down and figure out who gets what through the courts. 15% of the firms, at least, are dormant. If you look at estimates 2 ways, one is tried through the ASI, but that's very biased because the ASI panel throws out dormant without workers after 3 years. So you don't really know how many workers there are, how many firms are like this. The other way to do it is to look at the list of firms in the registry. There you get a number as high as 30%. So 30% of firms are either dormant with or without workers.
In the numbers, not
Yeah.
what type.
30% of the total. So, which is staggering, so much that they have to make a separate thing, dormant firms. No other data set I know has dormant firms. You go dormant means you're going to get out. So, okay. So, first thing I want to point out is when you have these barriers, what are you going to have? You're going to have low exit rates. Correct? Look at India. India is the first one here. These numbers, India, 3.1%. Mexico is 4%, Brazil is 4%. Both Mexico and Brazil have the same problems as India, but not as bad. Morocco, Chile, US is 9%. Keep going, China, 9.7%. Vietnam, one of the biggest growers recently. It's very dynamic, 17.23%. So these are super, super scary numbers for India. Let's look at exit rates by sector. The first one here is formal manufacturing, 3.1%. This is from ASI and this is from Prowess. Around the same, 3.1, 3.5. ASI has issues with measurement. Other services, 4%. Financial services, 6.3. Information management, 7. You see, it is sector specific. A lot of this is sector specific. But it's not as clean as you would think because the shadow of the laws apply to everything. There's no special bankruptcy law for information technology either, right? So
That's a clarification. So, what are the sector by sector differences in exit rate in other countries?
we don't have that data, but they're not that different across sectors. India is unique because of this institutional
difference. Okay.
Okay, so what I'm going to talk about also is very relevant in the broader context. So, for example, after COVID, there was this big issue about why the US recovered so much faster, that's the blue line, than the EU. And the reason, often people say, is the way that they responded to the pandemic. The US basically put the money for the pandemic to the people, to the workers, right? While the EU chose to protect jobs. So you got the money through the firm and you were attached to the firm. And because of that, the mobility after COVID between jobs, between industries, in the US, there was a lot of movement. In Europe, there was very little because it was zombified by the way that they dealt with COVID. And this is sort of a Financial Times point which other people have also made. So it's not just India. And now you're telling me it's also Japan.
Yeah, exactly.
Europe used to be really bad in the sense that they were very hard to fire workers. But in the last 20 years, pretty much every country in Europe has reformed their labor laws a lot. I think it started with the Nordic countries, but now, every country has basically done that. This is the outline of what I'm going to tell you about. The laws, bankruptcy, the political costs of all this, the empirical patterns and the micro data. I'm going to tell you about evidence for exit barriers in India. All of this evidence is new. Nobody has done this before. So we actually have much more than we put in the paper. A lot of this is in the appendices because we couldn't put in, we went overboard. So we did a lot of these things that we decided not to put in. And, how are firms responding to these exit barriers? And we're going to use these empirical patterns to make sure that our model captures those patterns. So we're going to structure our model so it's capable of capturing the patterns that we see. The quantitative model is very much a frontier model. It almost killed us. It's a really large state dynamic equilibrium model. And if we'd known how hard it was going to be, I don't think we would have done this paper. But it was a case of sunk costs. You're in there now, you just got to keep going. So it's a dynamic heterogeneous firm model with entry and exit, and with labor and capital adjustment costs and a lot of heterogeneity, which is what makes it hard. We wouldn't have been able to estimate this except that we found a lovely trick in a recent econometrics paper that let us do that. So in India, firms take a long time to exit. It takes about 4.3 years on average. And, these factors that I was telling you about make exit really difficult. So the labor laws say you cannot fire a regular worker called workmen in the documents from plants with 100+ workers. You need government authorization to fire these workers for these plants. They're big this is the idea. So if you want, I can tell you exactly what the law is here. So if you want to shut down or lay off, you have to first submit this application saying why. Then they would say yes or no after conducting an inquiry and saying what were the details of why you want to do this. And once you get permission, you have to pay them 15 days wages, which is nothing. And if they're found to do this, they can be imprisoned or charged a huge fine. I know people who went to jail for this. And if either the employer or the employee isn't happy with the decision, you can contest this. So it's very unpleasant.
Is there a union?
Sorry?
Is there a union?
Oh, yeah. India is very unionized. And they're the people who bear the brunt of these legal costs. So when a worker says he's fired, I'll give you some examples here. It's, this happens because then the unions take this to the worker. So, yeah, so I want to go back here and go back. Okay. So, these delays in dispute resolution, this is a really lovely case. Yeah, because nothing brings home how important this is until you look at specific cases. So Nokia in 2006, they were making flip phones. They set up their biggest factory in India. The states gave many concessions to lure them to their state, and it was a wildly successful factory. It was one of the largest factory, Nokia's largest factory worldwide. 20,000 employees, okay, in that factory, 15 million phones every month, mostly women employed there, which is very good, because women in India tend not to be having as many jobs as the men, and exported worldwide. But in 2013, people stopped using flip phones and went to start smartphones. And Vietnam gave them a better deal. So they wanted to get out. And there was labor unrest. The unions were like, don't go, you can't leave. And then there was an unfortunate death of an assembly operator on the road. And, it was very clear that Nokia was going to exit. But then the government did not want this because 20,000 workers, that's a lot of people. So Nokia said, okay, we'll sell the business to Microsoft. Okay. But then the government gets after Nokia. They filed 2 tax evasion cases. You can't leave until your cases are done. Okay. And the deal with Microsoft, the Indian factory had to be excluded because there was no way Microsoft was going to take this factory without huge amounts of money, which Nokia was not willing to pay. And in 2014, production completely stopped. The plant is now dormant, but you have to pay your workers. Nokia is bleeding. The tax dispute gets settled in 2018. The first case was struck down by the High Court. The second case, they got 202 million euro penalty from the Nokia guys. And there was like 2 years of paperwork and clearances because you have to get these no objection certificates from everyone to get out. And 2020, the factory was bought by Salcom. It took 6 years for them to exit. In the meanwhile, of course, they laid off their contract workers. Some of the regular workers took severance pay. Others had to be paid even though there was no production. And you can see this very clearly if you look at the Prowess data. We don't use the Prowess data, but I should go back. There are other cases also. So here are 2 more. So this is GM in 2006. It built a plant in Telegaon in Maharashtra. Started production in 2008. 2017, GM stops selling cars in India. They want to get out. They can't. They managed to get a Chinese company to take it. 2020 December, the plant closed, talks fall through. There is nothing going on until 2024. So even GM got into trouble, even when they sold it to a Chinese firm. The Chinese firms are better equipped to handle institutions in India. I mean, maybe you have to bribe people a little, maybe you have to do something. Americans are not that good at that. And it was illegal till recently to bribe people abroad. Now it's legal. Another example is how the Supreme Court struck down a buyout of JSW Steel's of Bhushan Power 4 years after it was done. This is unheard of, right? You do not say, oh, you did a buyout 4 years ago? Well, you can't do it. Go back to the way it was. 4 years later, impossible in any other country. In India, was done. So this is the kind of thing that happens in India. And that's what makes it such a challenging place to invest and operate in. So, there are lots of these uncertainties in court judgments. Here's an example from Bharat Forge, which is one of the biggest companies making forged things, making equipment. So they had a worker. He kept sleeping on the job. Right? He would be found taking naps. And they did all the procedures right. They said, first warning, second warning, remedial training, third warning, get out. Everything was documented. The lower courts said you have to come pay him back, get him back, and pay him back pay. After 22 years, the Supreme Court finally allowed his 22 years it took. The unions were financing the workers' thing all the way. I was a joke. So questions like this, is a hospital an industry? In 1960, the Supreme Court ruling was, yes, it's an industry. But it's not manufacturing. It's clearly not manufacturing. Then this gets reversed in 1967. So a hospital was deemed manufacturing. It's ridiculous. And then the Supreme Court reverses itself. This is the shadow that lies over all production, not just manufacturing and plant mining and plants. Who's a worker? A janitor? Yes? No? No. Is he contract? Not. What's covered? Shops? Airline pilots? These are all cases that have gone to the Supreme Court. All these companies have been burnt in India.
So, somewhat related perhaps. So when you told about this law, as I understand, the law binds if you have 100 or more regular workers.
Yes.
So I would have expected something like bunching around the 100.
Okay.
So then
Let me tell you, you don't see that in the data. You do not see that in the data. And why? So Kalyani, my co-author here, my student, on her job market paper, she had a beautiful paper as to why, right? And the reason is very simple. When you're looking for workers, think of a search model, right? You're trying to find workers. What do? You know that as you put more and more money into, searching for workers, you're going to have more and more workers acquired, but you can't be sure that you will get it. So it just increases the probability that you get the worker, right? So when you do that and put it in a dynamic search context, what do you realize? You realize that this 100 number is like a permeable gas barrier. You hit it, if you're going hard enough, you go through. If you're not going hard enough, chances are you'll bounce back. Moreover, you're shedding workers because people leave, they want to move to another city, they get sick, old, retired, whatever. So there are these two forces going on. It turns out that depending on how convex these search costs are, right, you could or could not get bunching. Because if these search costs are very convex, you won't want to spend the money to be almost sure.
Right.
Which means that you're not going to get bunching. Right? And also, if you have a lot of people retiring, you have a lot more, fudge factor there. So she shows that not only this, but she shows that even if you won't see bunching, you'll see differences in the transition across this barrier. So she shows there was a change in the law. It changed the number from 100 to 300 in some states, and this was rolled out state by state. So she uses this as the natural experiment. And she shows that before, when it was 100, you had the probability of jumping over this barrier was low. After, when the number became 300, the probability at 100 rose, but the probability at 300 fell. So it's exactly what the model predicted.
I see.
So, but that's a very good question.
Start as just bunching around it because you have like all these other.
Exactly. So you don't want to cross, but if you come hard enough, you'll cross.
Right.
So that's that was the solution to a big puzzle, because in the literature, traditionally, we've always used static models which predict bunching, right, at the threshold. But the world is dynamic. And the minute you realize that, you realize a lot of the puzzles that people talk about in India, if this is so big, why isn't there bunching? Well, it's because you're not thinking about a dynamic model. And when you look at dynamic model, you see exactly what to expect. Yeah, but that's a very good question. So Michael Gechter has a paper in the Restat a few years ago, where he points out that there's no bunching, and it's a puzzle. But we're like, why is it a puzzle? It's not a puzzle. Here it is. So,
Thank you.
but great question. So there's, a lot of clarity in the lack of clarity in this law, and the path to bankruptcy, which is the other thing, is also a big problem. So, like, there was this reform, right? The 1993, the debt recovery tribunals were set up, but they got clogged up. And then there were legal loopholes which were exploited by debtors. So, it ended up it fizzled out. Nothing happened with this reform. Then there was the SARFACI, which is the reform I think you're talking about, which, allowed secured creditors to take possession of secured assets within 60 days of notice to non-performing. But over time, the courts diluted this by allowing appeals by the borrowers. So most recently, this IBC was implemented, but when COVID came, it was shelved, and now it's being reinstated. The government is doing something very interesting just now, and it's really has a potential to change these labor laws in India. And this is because of the fact that in India, labor laws are what's called, it's covered by both the state and the center, which means both parties have to agree to any reforms. So the government, the Modi government, is basically trying to push this, make it just your state business, so you don't have to come to the center. And that way, each state can decide how much they want to change the labor laws or even remove them. And that's very interesting, because one of the things we do in the paper is we talk about spillovers from one state's reform to the other state's reform. So, and then of course there's red tape and there's political issues here with the institutions. Next. So what data do we use? We use the ASI data. I think most people who've worked on India are familiar with this data. This is it's a cross-section, a repeated cross-section of firms. There are two parts of the sampling frame. One is the smaller firms, which are sampled maybe at least once every 10 years, and the census sector, which is sampled every year. But India, unlike China, people don't do what the government says. You send them the form, they don't reply and send the form back. Okay? And these guys are called non-compliers. There's a non-complier list, but there's no penalty. Okay. So larger firms tend to comply much more than smaller ones. And so, you have the sampling frame as here. It's done really well. And it's done in stratified random sample. They're very careful about how everything is done. But the issues. Because of this repeated cross-section, there was no panel in India until they know which firm is which. And then the firms that were there in more than 1 year, they made them part of the panel. So it's not a balanced panel, but it's a panel. So you don't have the same firm there throughout. You'll have them appearing and disappearing and reappearing over time, especially if they're small firms, as they get drawn into the sample or not. But this puts unique pressures on using this data, which I'll tell you about how we deal with these things. So how to measure exit? This has been a big problem in Indian data. If you say it's based on removal from the panel, well, that's not right, because ASI will throw you out once you're dormant without workers for 3 years. You don't know whether this guy exited or not. Say in Cleanout, in their 2014 paper, they make in a footnote, they have a suggestion about how to do it. And that's what we picked up on. And the idea is very simple, which is you know which year the firm entered, because that's part of the data, the formation of the firm. So if you look at the vintage of the firm and you believe in the sampling strategy that they're doing is correct, and you look over large enough years. So if you look at 2 years, it won't be. Look at 5 years, things suddenly come into focus. Look at the fraction of firms of a particular vintage who exited over that 5-year period. So you won't know that this firm exited. But if you see that there were 100 firms in 2010 in your sample, born in 1970 to 75, and there were 75 firms 5 years later, you have a 25% exit rate. So this is the way that you can use the repeated cross-section, because the ASI is done in a very nice way to get exit rates. And that's basically what we do. So here are some facts. Yeah.
So I was wondering, so you said that in this ASI, they dropped the firms that were
dormant without workers for 3 years.
So they are, if you compute in this way, they are included in existing firms.
They're included, exactly. They're not like this, because we're not looking at a particular firm. We're looking at the fraction of firms that are there of a particular vintage. That's the trick.
But they are included in so these dormant firms are included
in the ASI pattern. They're there until 3 years.
Until 3 years. I just wanted to understand the interpretation of this exiting based on this ASI. The share of exiting firms include dormant firms.
You're just seeing exiting dormant firms. I have not exited.
Yeah.
You exit when you stop producing and leave the industry. So you decertify yourself in the firm registry.
Yeah, but you have to look at the registration rather than.
No, we don't look at it. We don't have to. If we use this trick, because we're not looking at a particular firm, we're looking at a fraction of firms that are in the data in ASI, whether they're dormant or active, no problem. Which, in 5 years later, if you see that you had 100 firms, but in that year that they were created, and now you only have 75. What do you say? 25% exited.
Okay, so ASI includes the firms that are like dormant for 3 years.
Oh yeah.
Okay, I see.
There's dormant with workers, dormant without workers, and active firms. These are the 3 categories. So that's the point. Otherwise, it's very hard to do this.
So it's like your model is market equivalent model, and you are only looking at like kind of whole market from frictions. So kind of in the sense of how much percentage of this farmer operating over those. So I mean, so and your model, maybe I don't see it yet, but the thing is that so maybe market equilibrium model, then and you need to just look at the kind of function of the farm in the kind of that real state.
Yeah, that's why we have the model to see what happens. We estimate the model and then we do counterfactual. So you'll see.
So maybe I thought the most lost person here, so excuse me, I'm not good this, but anyway. So in the data, can I make sure I understand? So you in your data set, are you saying that it's a repeated cross section, meaning that from year T to T plus 1, you cannot see which farm is which?
There are no form identifier.
Okay, so that is a path problem. And then are you saying that however the sampling strategy is such that if a farm appears in the samples in year T, then that same farm is also in the T plus 1.
In the panel, if it appears in T plus 5, then it'll be part of the panel.
Okay.
It'll get an identifier in the panel.
And you can connect to this.
Then you can connect. But they're holes, right? Which makes it very challenging.
Oh, and there's no guarantee that this same farm is sampled in T plus 5.
Exactly.
Oh, okay.
Exactly. So we know that now.
Okay, that's what you're saying.
That's what the panel did. It didn't do any new sampling. It just basically said, okay, we'll put the ID on. That's all.
Okay.
So that's why ASI is really challenging to work with for a number of reasons. And this is part of it. Okay. So here we are. The first one says, look, we have a rough positive correlation here. Entry rates are on the y-axis and exit rates are on the x-axis. Of course, we're looking at this at a state level, constructing the entry and exit the way we said. The exit entry is easy because you know when a firm came in, so you know the year of entry. Exit is more difficult, but we managed to deal with it by using this same clean-down trick. And we do this for the states. So the blue states here are what we're going to call low-performing states. The red states here are the high-performing states. What you see here is these states are all clumped together here, low entry and low exit. Of course, the states have different sizes, so we adjust for size. That's why entry and exit rates are adjusted for size. Okay, population. Why are we doing this? Well, theory tells you that if the laws are very strongly implemented in low-performing states, but not in high-performing states, less so in high-performing states, and because this is a state subject as well as a center subject, there's a lot of variation across states. You should see exactly this. The low-performing states will have low entry-exit rates. Why low entry exit rate? Well, steady state, we expect entry and exit to follow each other, right? And high-performing states will tend to have high entry and exit rates. The blue and the red colors here are the same in this. This is a measure of misallocation. This is the elasticity of log size with respect to log TFP. Revenue residuals is a way of getting TFP, which is not contaminated. It's not TFPR, it's TFPQ. Okay. So the idea here is when you are relatively flexible, the size and TFP the elasticity here should be high. Good firms are large. When you're not, it should be much lower. And that's exactly what you say. And the colors here, blue and the last one, the colors are exactly the same. So this should convince you that it is misallocation that you see. Entry, exit low, misallocation high. They're not responsive to TFP.
So Sharon Clean also has this misallocation, veggie.
Yeah, they have many.
Yeah,
Their
yeah.
their misallocation is more like wedges at the firm level.
Is it possible to correct that?
There's so much you'll see in this paper. I mean, like, you already put half of it away.
Might be interesting to see if it's larger in like capital one or labor.
Yeah. We're doing this in the next paper.
Oh,
We're looking at actually, how this misallocation is permitted by banks. So
But your elasticity parameter is with respect to revenue, TFP, right?
no,
Not revenue.
that's what called revenue residuals, but it's TFPQ. So we have a citation in fine.
So there is a distribution chart that
Yeah, all the TFP distributions I'll show you will be revenue residuals. So it's TFPQ.
Right.
It's a little macro trick that works.
their framework is static. If I remember.
This framework stack.
But it's dynamic, more dynamic.
Yeah, absolutely. But we estimate TFP as a process also, and I'll tell you more about that.
I thought, this, misallocation chart can be
Can be made dynamic.
into the.
Yeah, I mean, in the structural model, we're estimating all of this. So you'll see it comes out.
Oh, by the way, by cohort, you mean years of operation?
Exit, remember, you have to do by cohort,
Oh.
meaning which year you were born, because that's how the measure comes. So it's weighted share by cohort.
And UK is
Sorry.
what's the name of the state, UK?
Oh, okay. So this is Chhattisgarh, Rajasthan,
Yeah.
Kerala, Jharkhand, UP, Orissa, Bihar, Madhya Pradesh,
So it's
and
like
West Bengal. All the Bimaru
Bimaru
states.
states are. Okay. But what's the UK on top?
Oh, Uttarakhand.
After. So that state has a very stringent exit.
Yeah, one means you're at the mean.
Yeah, difficulty, right? Difficulty.
Yeah, it's slight outlier. It's very small.
Oh, I see.
So I think that's part of the reason why it's up there. Okay, next. Exit rates by firm age. You see, high performing states exit rates higher at every firm age. Yeah. This is the next picture I want you to look at. Here we have two graphs. It's a little confusing. On this axis, we have the log of plant age. And on this axis, down here, we have the density of TFP. So on this axis, we have density. On this axis, we have log TFP, revenue residual state. Okay. So you've got a lot in this picture. So this axis is the same up here and down here. Right? So what do you see here? The blue one is the low performing states, dash blue. Red is the high performing states. Okay. So what do you see in the distribution of firms? In LP states, there are many more old firms. This density has more mass here. Okay. Is that okay? And up here, low performing states have lower TFP than high performing states, which is what you would have expected. And you see also that here with age, in HP states, it goes up and there will be a little leveling off. In LP states, old firms, their productivity is a lot lower. This is saying that there are a lot of old, large firms stuck in LP states and not so much in HP states. So I really love this one. Now we're going to look at the impact of bankruptcy reforms on exit, which was the question that we were just reading.
Let's look at this by size.
Sorry?
You show it by age.
Right.
According to your story, it's like this 100 or.
Yeah, we'll see that. We'll see that. We always have that included, both in the model and in the estimation here, the evidence. So this is the surfacing one, which I told you about the reform. And what do? We just look at a very simple regression. This is an indicator variable for exit. We have fixed effects for, right? And time state, right? And industry, time fixed effects. And then we have, because we have the four fixed effects, we have the indicator of being highly leveraged, which means you're borrowing a lot. And this is post the surfacing. And so we have the leverage, distressed, and distressed interacted with high leverage. So why is this important? Because you know that it's going to affect you if you want to get out, you're distressed, you're not making a lot of money, you're making low profits or negative profits, which is how we define distressed, firms with profits in the bottom decile. Okay, is that right? And leverage is your above median liabilities to asset ratios. And what do we see when we run this regression? We see.
Sorry, I kind of missed what's the post T again? So what's the reform here?
Sorry, this was the surfacing, which was allowing you to exit more easily because the law changed in letting creditors seize your assets.
Thank you.
This has been highly studied in India, but not like this. So here we are. You know, the distress thing is not in here, but it turns out it really doesn't make any difference for this, because what you want to see is after surfacing, who are the ones who want to get out, distressed? Who are the ones who are highly leveraged, where there's going to be a lot of fight, right? This interaction should be positive. And what do we see? We see whether or not you put in this coefficient, you see that this, depending on in all states, this is 0.45. Moreover, this is not coming from HP states, it's coming from LP states. The reform, surfacing reform, affected LP states, not so much HP states, which is what you would expect, because the LP states is where the pressure was really strong, because their laws were being implemented much more strongly there. So again,
Also, before reform, 5.3 in LP state.
Sorry?
The exit rate before the.
We don't have data on the exit rates.
You have
This is the individual firm level.
Yeah, middle row,
Average.
one exit before reform. The second sentence, second block. Yeah, top left. Yeah. That's
these are the rates. Yeah.
So LP states the last column 5.3,
Mhm.
last column 4, number 4.
Yeah.
Column number 4.
Exit rate was higher here than here. Right?
Yeah, and then there was
that's what we expect, right?
Yeah, before reform.
Right. Do we have it after reform?
Yeah, after reform.
It's a good question. We should get it.
After reform, you have a 7.8. The blue.
Yeah. But this is not an average. This is
That's right.
high level.
Selected.
So we should
actually quite
we should
substantial.
put this down.
Yeah, substantial.
Yeah.
Increase in the exit rate. I think.
I remember that.
I was wondering whether you can do the same exercise for 2016 Bank code. That's more.
We could do it.
Although post before COVID, you have only a few years, but a couple of years. But
part of the reason we were not doing that was we only got the panel data until 2017, and we only got it recently after that. They're very slow to release the panel. Yeah. No, but that's we should put that line in. Thank you. Yeah, that's a good point. Then, second thing is, frictions to labor adjustment. What are you seeing, right? What would you expect? You would expect that when you have a negative shock, you want to get rid of workers, right? That's all that this is about. So you've got the same kind of fixed effects, right? Then we have the negative shock dummy. What is the negative shock dummy? We're just going to follow the literature here and say you're residualizing the gross value added of plant, industry, state fixed effects. Because you're comparing apples and oranges. You have to get rid of those. Otherwise, you're going to have nonsense. And using those residualized GVAs, S is low performance state, and a dummy for that. And then you can see here, beta 1 is the effect of a negative shock on plant employment once we've homogenized the data. And then is this more so or less so in LP states? Let's see what we get. And this is exactly what we would expect. We have regular workers here first. The negative shock is just, yes, once you have a negative shock, you get rid of your workers. Now we look at LP states, you see that this is significantly less, because this is positive for LP states. So this is evidence there's more frictions in LP states than in HP states. Now you say, okay, contract workers, yeah, you can get rid of them real fast. There's no difference between HP and LP states. Managers are not covered by this. Again, no difference between HP and LP states. So hopefully this will, convince you that we're on the right track. Then this is your thing about firm size. Are there different effects above and below 100? And we do this, the same thing, regular workers, contract workers, manufacturer, managers. And what do you see? You see when you have the coefficients, of course, a shock is going to reduce your workers. That's better be expected. This interaction, triple interaction, shock, LP states above 100, all the actions coming through there. It's exactly what you would expect. Nothing on the contract workers, nothing on the managers. It's the above 100, all the action is coming from there in LP. This is where the average effect is actually coming. This is to convince you, again, these guys, you're looking at the profits, variable profits, is for plants approved dormancy here. This is the time dormant is 0. This is the time before dormancy. What are you seeing? This is just variable profits. Okay, so any fixed cost that you're incurring will bring this line down. So you're not making positive profits, you're making positive variable profits. Look at this. In HP states, the profits are much higher all the way down here. It takes a lot of work to get firms out in LP states. They're making losses out the wazoo, and they're not exiting.
Can you remind me how you actually categorize A states to LP versus non-LP?
Sorry?
Can you remind me how to define which states are LP?
For the exit rates, the red states and the blue states. Okay. The low exit rates and entry rates, those are LP states.
I see.
And we showed that those states also are the ones that don't respond to TFP in size.
The story is that the strictly law against exit.
Because this is in the hands of the states, right? So the states can choose to dilute it or choose to make it stronger, and it's political pressure that's.
Yeah. Actually, my question is so to the extent that your way to define the state of the LP is actually through this actual exit rate.
Exactly. Both, and then you can do it either way. You'll get the same answer. Responsiveness, right? TFP elasticity
Okay, one
and
thing,
size.
and
It's the same, you get the same thing.
Right.
Exactly the same thing.
so yeah, the one thing I was not I was wondering, however, is that so to see if at least casually perhaps does this categorization align well with the sort of like how the law is written here in these other states? I mean,
Yeah.
it's probably harder to interpret.
No.
than,
This is Burgess does this. He tries to do this, and it doesn't work. It really doesn't work. There've been number of papers written after Burgess's paper, which are highly cited, which show if you go into detail over this, you can change these numbers for the ranking of how flexible the labor market is. There are 3 or 4 people who've been writing on this, and it's such a subjective way
Okay.
of doing
So
it. You
that's-
look at the law. Oh yeah, I put the 2 on this, and the other one. Oh no, you should put a 1 on this. I mean,
I
the
see.
only way to really get something is to say what is the effect. The model says the effect has to be like this. Do you see that? If you see that, and the model says it should be monotonic in this, if you see that, then you've got to give it to classify. That's how we differ from Burgess and all the people in the past. This is completely new way of defining things. And it makes perfect sense, right? If you believe your models are predicting X, then you use the prediction to see, is this lining up on all the dimensions where you expect it to see? Yes. Then you say, yep, I got it. And that's how we feel about it. The way we
But
do it.
is the state law actually different? Are there a lot of variation in the written state laws, or this is more like coming from like a court judges?
This is, so we only know what happens in the state, in the sense of what the outcome of this is. So we're not looking at the laws. We're looking at the reflection of the laws in terms
I
of
understand, but
outcomes.
in your interpretation, where these variations come
Uh-huh.
from, is it more? Do you think this is mostly coming from like a written law or a state?
It's coming from the
courts?
implementation.
Implementation, so courts.
Not just the courts, it's coming from
Local
the politics,
governments,
the government, at the very local level. I mean, if you're in a bad, low performing state, you try to get out, you'll have politicians climbing all over you. It'll be impossible. There'll be corruption. It's a nightmare. So, just to summarize, what have we shown? We've shown, I hope, that our classification makes sense. It has the consequences that theory would expect you to see, both in terms of the distribution of forms and the ability to adjust, and the role of dormancy. You become dormant on the way to exit. Because of all this, our model is going to allow for a lot of heterogeneity. We're going to allow for labor firing costs to vary by high-performing, low-performing states and plant size because of the law, 100 or not. And we're going to vary the direct exit costs across these high-performing and low-performing states. These high exit costs plus factor adjustment costs lead to dormancy. That's the basis. So let's get to the quantitative model. I don't know why this is here. Okay. This should not be. Okay. So here's a sort of a way of seeing the whole model. And I know it's complicated, but I hope this will help. All right. Okay. So let's see. This is how you come in, you pay your fixed cost of entry. Right? Then you realize your productivity fee. And you realize your scrap value. Minute you come in, you could get out. The scrap value is going to be drawn from a distribution. Why? To match the data. Right? If you want, you can exit right away. Just like minutes. Come in, I don't want to do this. Or you can stay. When you stay, what do? You're going to use you're going to try and target some input levels. For capital, regular workers, LR, and LC, contract workers. So we're going to have two kinds of workers. Contract workers you can get rid of. So they are static decision there. Regular workers, their adjustment costs. So that's a dynamic decision. Capital, there's adjustment costs, and there's a dynamic decision. Why do you target these output levels? Hey, you want to think about this in a research setting, right? You want to hire so many workers. You may not be able to hire that many, you will hire more or less. So this is just the target, and then you draw some shock. Again, this is to match the data, because if you could hit the nail on the head, you would see bunching. You don't see bunching. Then your actual input levels are realized, and the fixed cost of production is realized. This again is random. It's drawn from a distribution. Why? Because you see firms who look very similar are making very different decisions about this. Again, this is to match the data. And then, if you decide to be active and produce, you pay this fixed cost of production, and you choose your intermediate inputs, which are flexible. If you do this, then you're an incompetent, and you come down and you do the whole thing again. If you decide you do not want to pay this fixed cost of production, then you go dormant. If you go dormant, you don't have to pay this fixed cost of production. But there's a cost in the sense that when you come back to being non-dormant, you will have a different fixed cost of production because you were dormant. And so now you're different from firms that were active all the time. So you pay a cost there. So this is just this sort of basically mellets, but with more twists to allow for more heterogeneity. Yeah?
So what kind of identify influence cost or influence fee?
You'll see. I'll tell you what the identification is.
So because the thing is that what you can observe that all firms already enter into the market, right? Because by the nature of the data, because what we can observe.
No, but you know the year that they entered. You know the year they were formed. Even if they weren't in the data there. So you know firm age from the year that they were formed information.
But the year data is basically guide sensor in the sensor year.
Yeah. But because this is a structural model, we can go deal with these data problems by making sure that our structural model has the same deficiencies as the data, in essence, and that takes care of the data problems.
I see.
That's the big plus of using a structural model. Yes.
Okay, let's see that.
So let's just supposing you are here, you're choosing your target input levels, and let's go next. Oops, sorry. So plant output is given by a usual, Cobb-Douglas CRS production function, and the labor has both regular workers and contract workers, as the data, as the institutions tell us. And there's a composite labor made up from these two. And the plants are taking wages and price of intermediates as given. The price of capital is determined endogenously. If you exit, your capital gets sold and becomes available for other firms, so that when you exit, you are fixing. If you're if a low productivity firm, you're now contributing to productivity growth. There's static inputs, labor, intermediate inputs, and the dynamic inputs, which is the regular workers and capital, because the adjustment costs you'll save. The productivity is going to evolve according to this AR1 process. So supposing that, a plant wants to increase employment or capital, how are we dealing with these adjustment costs? The targeted employment level is L bar. the hiring cost is always going to take the hiring and firing cost. So they're going to take this form. This is what we can think of as the H total cost. So there's some parameter CH, and then you put the 1 in so that you don't have a log of 0. You could do it in other ways too. And this is the percentage change, right? So if I want to change my target by a lot, then it's going to cost me a lot. So it's convex adjustment cost. This is building on what Cooper does in his work. Ours is a little bit more complicated here. We're going to have heterogeneity here by worker type, regular and contract. Contract workers don't have this. By state, HP and LP, because we know that these hiring and firing costs can vary by state, by type of state. We didn't have the data to do it state by state, so we just went HP and LP. And whether it's hiring cost or firing cost. And you're going to, this whole number is there to show that there's a higher cost for larger firms with the same percentage factor adjustment. And yeah, the firing costs are a little bit different, but not too different. Same thing, this is going to be the firing cost, and the form it takes is going to be different for above 100 and below 100. So we're just respecting the law here. So we're going to estimate these red things. Yeah.
But if we go on one side,
Sorry?
go on one side.
Oh, sure.
So she is an unobserved heterogeneity for individual or
For groups. So this is you're allowing by a contract worker or regular worker difference, hiring cost, because hiring contract workers are supplied by a firm. That's this contract working supplier.
I get the data for individual. Get the data for firm.
Yeah. No, you see, there's a limit. The ASI is not such a large data set. So you can only estimate these for groups of firms and groups of states. We can't do this at the individual firm.
So she is the unobserved heterogeneity for a firm.
But this is at the firm level by worker type, whether it's a contract worker or a regular worker, and by which state you're in, HP or LP, and whether the cost is one for hiring or firing.
Yeah.
So it's very, there's a lot of depth here and a lot of detail here. Okay. So this is just the usual form. And we the stochastic part of you're targeting this, well, that's we're going to assume is log normal. And then let's look at the next level here. We're active in producing here. How are we going to be identifying these things? We'll see in a minute. But you're drawing this scrap value productivity chart. You just make this decision. If you exit, what do you get? I think this is important. You're going to get your, sorry, wrong thing. You're going to get, this is the exit, the scrap value, FE. So this is the total, these are the components, your scrap value, you sell your machinery, you get this money. You have this depreciated capital. Then this is the fact that you are going to have a realization of FE, so this is random. Okay. And you end up having these labor adjustment costs as part of your final exit value, because this is what labor you had last period, but you want to go to zero. So this is getting out on the labor side, okay? Both for regular workers and for contract workers. So we're allowing different labor adjustment costs. When you exit, you can make deals that you may not be able to make otherwise. That's why this is going to be a little different for contract workers and regular workers when you're looking to exit. And capital adjustment costs, similarly, are going to be different because when you exit, you actually sell your land. You never sell your land until you exit. So we found we had to allow for this difference for capital adjustment costs when you're exiting versus when you're exiting. So you make your decisions, and you go on from there. So how are we getting the identification? So it's very intuitive. You have the mean and the variance of the fixed costs of production are going to be identified through the behavior of the firms. So you're going to, other things constant, the higher these means fixed costs, the lower the probability you're going to produce, because you can get away with not paying them if you don't produce. This variance is going to give you the range of productivities of firms that are going to produce. When you have this higher range, some low productivity firms could get lucky and they may stay in. Okay. Similarly, mean and variance of scrap value, the higher the scrap value, the more likely firms are to exit. So the average exit rates are going to be pinning down that. And the lower is this, the less you're going to exit. And again, this variance of this distribution is going to give you the productivity spectrum of exiting firms. Because there's a lot of variance, there's going to be a lot of productivity variation in the firms that exit. And otherwise, you won't have so much. Factor adjustment costs, you're going to identify these as usual in terms of transitions of employment over states. So, if you go from active to dormant with workers versus. The larger the hiring and firing costs, the smaller the change with the productivity, as we saw in our estimates. And larger variance, the less your ability to actually target the factor levels. So all of this is going to be intuitively identified, but the actual identification is hairy, to say the least. You're using what's called quasi-maximum likelihood, which is a form of indirect inference, except instead of using particular moments, we use the moments being the parts of the likelihood function that are needed for identification of the parameters. So we're using just likelihood moments rather than means, some data means or variances. There's some issues in terms of technicalities, which we managed to get around by using the structural model. So for example, when you have a likelihood function, because you have you're in or out, you exit or you don't exit, you produce or you don't produce, these make the likelihood function jagged and very hard to deal with. The way around this econometrically is not to take this as a 0-1 choice, but to take it as a probability. And once you take it as a probability, the whole likelihood function gets smoothed out. This is the econometrics paper I was telling you about that let us do this. Because when you have many states, I'm not saying like good states, bad states, I mean states variables, and you have these kinds of 0-1 functions, using standard techniques to maximize your likelihood function become very difficult without using these econometric tricks. The other thing that's really good because of using the structural model is, the mess that the data is in the ASI. Hey, you just reproduce that in your structural model and you have overcome the data problems in ASI because you're matching like with like. So, okay. So let's look at the estimates. This is the hiring cost of capital and the firing cost of capital. Okay? You can see the hiring cost is lower than the firing cost by several order, by 8 times. This is the more interesting part. For regular workers, this is the hiring cost for regular workers, CHR, and that is not varying by HP and LP states, nor is this, and that's the life. Now, let's look at the firing cost of regular workers in low performing states. So CFRL. Okay. And what do you see? You see in HP states, it's lower than in LP states, which is what you'd expect. They're more flexible, less flexible. Okay, does that make sense? Then this is for large firms and this is for small firms. LR means large, this means small. Smaller for small firms than for large firms. Okay. Adjustment cost of non-regular workers, much smaller. Hiring cost is same across these two. Yeah, 5%. Okay.
So I was a bit surprised that even for the smaller firms,
It's
the
there.
hiring cost.
But this is what I was saying, there are the shadow of the law falls on things where it shouldn't be falling.
Can you answer my question? Can you remind me what the small farm here?
Below 100.
Below 100.
Yeah.
Okay, I see.
They're not subject to the IDA
In
directly,
principle,
but the shadow is there.
okay. So if you actually take this small farm to be, let's say, much smaller, let's say.
Yeah.
Then-
They're less than 100. They're not the other definition that is, informal or anything like that. It's not like that. It's just the 100 number. And
All the firms in the data set are registered.
all firms are registered.
Yes.
There's a separate data set for informal firms, which only recently people have started using,
Right.
but it's not a panel. So
Yes.
yeah.
But for these informal and much smaller micro enterprises,
There would be much less, we would expect far less frictions for them.
Right.
But at the same time, the shadow of the law is very strong. Okay. So just to quantify this, you pay about 71% of your annual wage to hire non-regular workers and 146% of your annual wage or hiring regular workers. Just to quantify what that number is. Costs are, much larger for firing regular workers than contract workers. You can see that here. In low performing states, this versus this. Small and large for large firms, this versus this. Small firms, this versus this. Exit costs. Again, high HP states, smaller. So the value of your exit, your scrap value, is negative actually. You don't get anything out of it. But it's more negative in LP states. This tells you how bad it is. All the institutional issues about no bankruptcy law. It's really, most firms have to say. In HP states, it's about 110% of annual sales you have to pay to get out. LP states, it's even more, almost over 170%. And that makes sense, you've been bleeding yourself dry by paying these workers because you can't fire them. You'd be very happy to pay to get out. So now here are the counterfactual exercises that we're going to perform using our model. So now, factor adjustment costs, we know are, and say exit costs from the estimates, they're quite substantial. Now we're going to look at two different policy instruments. We're going to say, you change the labor market adjustment cost, this is labor reforms. Change that number from 100 to 10,000, or drop it overall. Okay? Or change bankruptcy costs, but here we say, okay, if you change bankruptcy costs, then you'll be changing the mean scrap value. You'll be raising it if you made it much easier to exit directly. So we're going to look at 4 separate cases: high-performing states, low-performing states, two-way classification, labor-intensive sectors, and capital-intensive sectors. Because we know that for labor-intensive sectors, it's likely to be much more important than for capital-intensive sectors, because they don't have that much labor and it's not going to be a big deal. We're going to start out with partial equilibrium, which means we're going to have a total expenditure of the country, demand side, fixed, and a price index fixed in each market. And there are no spillovers across these groups. So there's no trade in these things. And the aggregate effect is just going to be a weighted average. In the next one, we'll have more GE effects. This is what's sort of surprising. We're going to keep W fixed, the total K fixed, and the total price index fixed. The estimates are going to be quite conservative because K is going to be fixed. So as more firms enter, the return to capital will go on because demand for capital is there. So this is going to choke off entry. So our estimates here, for the counterfactuals, will be quite conservative. If we had a positively supply of capital, as R rises, you get more capital, you're going to get more effects, and I'll show you that also. The fixed price index means competition won't increase with entry. Fixed wage means you have unlimited supplies of labor. This is actually a very good assumption for India. There's been no evidence showing that when you have manufacturing growing in your state, that wages are rising. There's a lot of unemployed labor that will be happy to come. So we're going to proceed in sort of steps. We're going to change our policies to target 50% of the US exit rate, so only 4.5%. We're not going to be dramatic. We don't want to become the US. It'll be very hard. Let's try and get partway there. We're going to look at the aggregate effects across these two policy instruments. Change labor adjustment costs and change scrap value. And we're going to look at the role of this capital supply elasticity and heterogeneity across industries. Then we're going to look at synergies between policies, subsidizing entry versus exit, and then general equilibrium. So this is the roadmap. There's a lot of detail in these pictures, so I'm hoping that I'll be able to explain them simply. So this is how we chose to present our counterfactuals. So let's look at the first one. We're changing scrap value. We're fixing capital supply, and this is partially. So we're targeting the current status for exit rate is here. The target status is here, 50% of the US exit rate. On this axis, we have the average exit rate. And here, this is the change in the variables that we're drawing: value added, productivity, employment, and the number of firms. So we're saying, all right, if we want this particular outcome, this exit rate, and we achieve this exit rate by raising the scrap value, which makes it more attractive to enter, and therefore easier to exit, what are we going to get? you can see at this number, so the value added is this black line here, colored black line here. You can see at this number here, you're getting about 14% increase in value added. Okay. So that's what these numbers are saying. Your value added will increase by 14%, mass of firms will increase by 18%, time in dormancy falls from 3.46 to 2.37 years, employment will increase by 8.1%, and productivity will increase by 3.2%. Everything's all good things, right? Productivity will change because exiters' productivity will rise. Firms that were not happy to exit will now be happy to exit. That margin will become slacker, easier, easier to get out. That's why the productivity will rise. Entrance productivity will fall. It will be easier you'll want to get in. So even the bad firms will get in. So these are going to change, result in this productivity. All up with scrap value. All right, now let's look at labor adjustment costs. These, other than employment, these are not too different. Similar effects on value add and mass of firms in dormancy. Productivity also increases, but employment falls. This is the first big lesson. I think for me, I was not expecting this because there are reasons to expect it to go either way, right? On the one hand, the firms that exit when you have reduced labor market adjustment costs will be the large, unproductive firms with large amounts of labor who wouldn't have gotten out unless you reduce the labor market adjustment cost. When you increase scrap value, reduce exit costs directly, it's the firms that don't have so much labor that exit because labor market adjustment costs have not been changed yet. So only the smaller firms who are less productive will be exiting. Because they're smaller, they won't release so much labor, which is why employment keeps rising when you look at scrap value. When you look at labor market adjustment costs, on the other hand, selection is completely different. It's the large, labor-intensive firms which are not productive, which now say, this is my chance to get out. They shed a huge number of workers, even though entry goes up, and which absorbs a lot of these workers. It's not enough. I was shocked here because I was fully expecting even here you would have employment rising. But this stage, there's some rationale for these labor laws. You do not want unemployment. You lose the next election, for sure. You see, in heterogeneities, this is much larger in LP states, in labor-intensive sectors. The logic, as I was saying, for the difference in these two, in scrap value changes and labor adjustment costs, is which firms it's going to operate on, the selection margin, as I was saying again. Two completely different types of firms are affected here. When we increase the supply of capital, allow a positive supply elasticity, it magnifies the effects on value added, employment, mass of firms. But you still get a loss of employment in with changes in labor market adjustment costs. If you want, I can show you what the scrap value of this is, but we can, we can see. Yeah, it's quite a lot.
So the next
So
is from level, right?
Next lecture will be from 11 o'clock.
Oh,
You may want to have some break.
Yeah. So maybe
So we are almost done anyway. So here is the synergies. When you look at value added, all right, if you look at just the increase in scrap value, here you are. This is the green line, green part. Okay? If you look at just the reduction in firing costs, it's this much. This orange part, we've piled it onto this. But when you do both together, you get an addition, the blue part. This is what we mean by synergies. So the policy story here is the order in which you implement the policies is important. First, don't do labor reforms first, do the institutional reforms of bankruptcy, and then do the reforms. With employment, if you do the 1 + 2, you get this. If you do them together, you get employment going up. So if you don't want to be stuck with low employment ever, you should always do it like this. Here we look at using a fixed budget to subsidize entry versus exit. And here, the basic idea is two. One is entry is better for employment, entry subsidies, and exit subsidies are better for value added and productivity. Because you subsidize entry, a lot of small firms come in, they hire people, but they're not that good. So when you have exit subsidies, you get rid of the bad firms, that increases value added a lot and productivity. So with general equilibrium, the main thing that we see is it dampens the effects. This is partial equilibrium, value added, this is general equilibrium value added. Why? Because general equilibrium, when firms enter, the price index falls and that chokes off entry. Right? General equilibrium also has income going up, but manufacturing is a small part of the economy, so that doesn't do much. It's the price index changing that chokes things off. Employment, it actually is partial equilibrium. You're getting scrap value employment going up. It actually is pretty flat in general equilibrium. So general equilibrium really makes the effects much weaker. Similarly here, you also have spillovers across states. If you do it in low performing states, the high performing states are hurt, which is what we expected, and their welfare is reduced. Labor adjustment cost, well, it's really bad, okay? It attenuates the employment loss. So, this is the conclusion. This is a great quote from the economic survey. It says, India has made great strides in removing barriers to entry reforms, but not in terms of exit. So we moved from socialism with limited entry to marketism without exit. So, this paper is the first, I think, to target the role of exit, build a structural model and do counterfactuals. And I think it actually has a lot to say to explain why India developed the way it did. Thank you very much for putting up with this. It's a lot.
Yeah, I was thinking of a concrete example, pharmaceutical.
Oh, yeah.
The industry is really vibrant and the pharmaceutical firms are also part of manufacturing, part of IDA policy. So
But they're not labor intensive.
I see.
They're very capital intensive.
Yeah, that's right. Capital intensive. So
And you see that capital intensive firms are much less effective. And labor.
So high performing states host like
They're all in high performance states.
Maharashtra is
They choose to go to the HPCs. They would not be caught dead in the HPC. So yeah, it's really weird. I mean, how India.
This is interesting.
Yeah, so when you first started to talk about this, like maybe we are development people, so we know like basically this classical paper, the 90s classical paper about the labor regulation.
Oh yeah. You mean the Burgess paper?
Burgess,
Besley Burgess.
Besley Burgess.
Yeah.
And you think that it's kind of in a similar line, but it's like
it's
not
I
very.
think that paper is deeply flawed.
I see.
Because the work that came after that
Yeah.
showed that two things. One is there's so many details to this that they didn't explore. Okay, so it was one is, they found other case changes which were not included in Besley-Burgess. So, and then the second thing is the problem is this is all subjective, right? If I change the weighting of the different labor reforms that they count, I could get any number I want. And this is the big problem with all these, I hate to say this, but World Bank things, there are these indices. Oh, this means plus this means minus this. The only really believable way to do it is to say, economics tells me that if this is the case, I should see this in the data. It's like you have something and the shadow of that policy should fall like this. Is that shadow falling the way that you expect it to fall? If you can show that, then you've made the only, in my mind, convincing case that this policy, this issue is there, and you can quantify it through the extent of its shadow. So, so you have to have the model. You can't just look at, you can't just count regulations.
Yeah, I see your point.
Yeah, I think it's sort of very natural to start the way we did, right? The first thing to do is look at the regulations. Maybe that'll tell us everything, but then we learn there are problems there.
Yes.
This is what all of economics is, right? We learn. So I think a lot of what we did is because we learned from Besley-Burgess. And I don't think this paper would have been here without Besley-Burgess. But things change. We never had these structural models.
That's right.
To be able to play.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's a big change in the last
20 years. It's a huge change.
Yeah. Nice.
Not that it's perfect, but it's far from perfect, but we're making improvements every day, I think.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable.
So in the next 5-10 years, you would envision our manufacturing sector will move towards the.
But yeah, the big problem. So our model is closed, right? That's, I think, a big defect in what we're doing, because think about it, right? We have this expenditure not growing, and that's constraining the general equilibrium, because manufacturing is a small part of the whole economy, and India is poor. So if India becomes richer, your share of expenditure on manufacturing will grow, right? We have homothetic preferences, right? So these are the directions which could make things look more optimistic. Open the economy up, you'll get more demand. You won't be constrained by domestic demand. Make preferences non-homothetic. So as India becomes richer, you even get more and more demand from within India. 1.4 billion people, right? That will make this. But I think, there's so much more that can be done here, right? Study how banks are helping sustain this unsustainable equilibrium. And in India, people are very worried about the banking sector because it's not in good shape. There are all these non-performing assets on their books. They have to get rid of them to make it strong. And there's similar problems Japan faced after the real estate crisis, which is blamed for why Japan had a generation of stagnation. Right? So India is in a similar place. China is in a very similar place now. And what we learned from this, I think, was you have to get rid of NPAs. Non-performing assets have to be cleansed. If they're not cleansed, there'll be a drag for generations.
Yeah. It's
It's very hard to do that. Because the political will to do that.
Japan's problem is firms started accumulating a huge amount of internal finance to prepare for retained earnings.
Uh-huh.
That was so large, and I think one interpretation is probably self-protection against the financial crisis.
I see.
Because the government public bailouts in 1990s heavily criticized.
I see.
So private sector probably they don't form accept
I see.
expectation.
I see. So they weren't expecting loans, so they kept the
Yeah,
earnings,
yeah.
return earnings as
Japan
insurance.
return.
I see. Instead of reinvesting.
Yes.
That's very interesting. That's a nice channel.
Behavioral change
After that.
3 decades of lost the economy.
I see. No, because I think in the rest of the world, it's a big puzzle. Why these lost generation in Japan? Because, I mean, look, in America, I mean, it was like the Japanese will take over the world,
Yeah.
right? I mean, that was in the 80s.
80s.
It was Japan is going to take over the world. And then suddenly it didn't.
And it was a demographic change. Now 30% Japanese population about 65 years old.
Yeah.
But I think retained earnings and not investing in forward-looking.
That's the bigger problem.
That's the
Yeah, but I mean, this is the trade-off, right? You bail the banks out and you say never again, right? And then they don't want to lend because they don't want the never again to happen.
right.
So it's
Would you have a break like that?
We should be some friends.
yeah.